It happened in plain sight, yet no one saw it coming. The Nigerian officials were already seated, some with barely hidden smirks, others masking their unease behind dark glasses and well-fitted suits. It was supposed to be a discreet operation. No press, no official memo, just quiet coordination among high-ranking West African politicians and the full backing of foreign intelligence. Ibrahim Traoré, young, unshaken, defiant, was walking into a trap, a diplomatic invitation turned snare. He was lured under the guise of an emergency ECOWAS consultative dialogue in Abuja, Nigeria. The real plan? Strip him of his presidential status right there and then, isolate him from his security, detain him, quietly spirit him away under the veil of internal concerns in Burkina Faso. But what happened next would become the kind of tale sung by griots in the market squares of Ouagadougou. Not only did Ibrahim Traoré evade the trap, but he turned it into a moment that shattered illusions of regional unity and exposed foreign puppetry at the highest levels. What was meant to humiliate him became a thunderclap of shame for the planners. The world watched in disbelief. Young Africans cheered in the streets. The mask of diplomacy had slipped, revealing the snarling face of neo-colonial control. And how did he escape? What did he know that others didn't? Let's go back, before the Abuja trap, before the humiliation of giants. Let's follow the quiet fire that had been building, step by step, in a small landlocked country where the people decided they'd had enough. Burkina Faso, 2022. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This story belongs to all of us. They say revolution doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. And in 2022, Burkina Faso's door was hanging off its hinges. Jihadist violence was spreading like wildfire. Towns cut off, villages torched. The state was crumbling. The people were abandoned. President Paul-Henri Damiba, a man who had seized power in a coup just months earlier, seemed more interested in wine glasses and Western dinners than defending the homeland. He was soft on France, tough on his own people. But somewhere deep in the military ranks, a young captain named Ibrahim Traoré was watching. He wasn't loud. He didn't posture. He didn't attend banquets. Instead, he patrolled the red earth roads of the north, shoulder to shoulder with his men. He listened to mothers who had lost children, slept under the stars with villagers too afraid to sleep in their homes. He saw the truth. The fight was not just against terrorism, it was against betrayal. Betrayal by elites who fed on foreign aid while Burkinabe bled in silence. And so the quiet captain began to move. Slowly, carefully, like a snake in dry grass. He built alliances among younger officers, many from poor backgrounds just like him. They were tired of watching their friends die without backup. Tired of commanders in Ouaga sending rusty weapons and fake promises. Then came the moment. September 2022. Damiba was out of touch. Literally. The capital was swelling with whispers. Something was coming. And when it did, it came fast. Traoré, just 34 years old, led a coup that sent shockwaves across Africa. But this wasn't a coup for power, it was a cry from the trenches. In his first speech, Traoré stood like a man who knew he had crossed a line with no return. "We are not here to enjoy," he said. "We are here to give our lives if needed." And people believed him. Old men in villages knelt and prayed for him. Youths painted murals of his face next to Sankaras. Women chanted his name in marketplaces. He wasn't just a president. He was a son of the soil. But as his popularity soared, the hyenas began to circle. If this message resonates with you, take a second to like this video. It helps more people see it. France was the first to feel the burn. Within weeks of taking office, Traoré ordered French troops out. "We will not share our land with those who disrespect our sovereignty," he said. And just like that, 400 French special forces packed their bags. The tricolor flag was lowered. Western media called him dangerous, unstable. But inside Burkina Faso, he was doing what no leader had done in decades. He armed volunteer defense groups from local communities. He opened military academies for rural youth. He changed the official language in military briefings from French to local dialects. He visited frontline towns others feared to name. And he spoke often, not to elites but to the people. In dusty town squares, through radio, through youth forums. He reminded them, the enemy is not just the terrorist with a gun. It is also the politician who sells his country in whispers. But the more he defied the old order, the more that order tightened its grip. ECOWAS, the regional bloc dominated by Nigeria and France's old allies, began to murmur, then condemn, then threaten. Sanctions were whispered. Isolation was tested. But Traore held firm. Alongside fellow military-led governments in Mali and Niger, he began to craft a new vision, one not of dependence, but of Pan-African sovereignty. They called it the Alliance of Sahel States AES. And that's when the secret plans began. Leaders in Abuja, Accra, and Abidjan grew nervous. This alliance threatened everything. Old deals, old loyalties, old control. France pushed from behind the curtain. Nigeria's Bola Tinubu stepped forward. And soon a letter was sent. An invitation. Emergency ECOWAS consultation. Security threat. Mandatory attendance. Nigeria will host. Inside the palace in Ouagadougou, his advisors warned him. Mon capitaine, it smells of a trap. But Traore smiled. Let them think I'm naive. I will go. And so he did. He flew into Abuja with only a small security team. No fanfare, no press, just a dusty green jumpsuit and the fire of 1,000 ancestors in his eyes. They thought he was walking into a cage. Instead, he was walking into history. Subscribe and share this if you believe the time for Africa to rise is now. The moment Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the plane in Abuja, the air changed. Nigerian security agents, dressed in crisp uniforms with unreadable expressions, flanked the tarmac. They offered polite bows, but the tension in their shoulders betrayed them. Something was wrong and Traoré felt it. He had walked into a lion's den with nothing but his pride and principle. But that was enough, because he wasn't just a man, he was a message carried by the wind from Timbuktu to Tamale. Africa is waking up. Inside the ECOWAS compound, the real play began. Tinubu's aides ushered Traoré into a private waiting room, alone. His small entourage was told to wait elsewhere. Protocol, they said. Security screening. He didn't resist. He sat calmly, folded his hands and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, then more. No agenda, no delegation, just silence and cold stares from uniformed guards shifting at the corners of the room. Then came the call. A top Nigerian intelligence officer entered. He didn't smile. He didn't greet. Captain Traoré, he said, there have been concerns raised by multiple ECOWAS states regarding your legitimacy and your recent security actions. You are to remain here until further consultations are made. Your movements will be restricted. In other words, you're under arrest. They didn't say the word. They didn't need to, but they had underestimated the boy from Bondakwi. Just months before, in a forest camp near Burkina Faso's eastern border, Traoré had sat with young soldiers eating with their bare hands, listening to the crackle of firewood and the distant sounds of war drums. What if they come for you? One soldier had asked. Traoré didn't blink. Then they come for all of us. And those words were no poetry, they were prophecy. Back in Abuja, just as the Nigerian officers tried to move him into a controlled diplomatic suite, Traoré calmly pulled out a satellite phone from his coat. It wasn't state-issued. It was custom-rigged, secure, untraceable. He dialed a number. Within 5 minutes, Burkina Faso's military high command was on high alert. Within 10, a battalion from the northern front was mobilized. Within 20, soldiers had taken strategic positions across Ouagadougou. And more than that, something else happened. Mali and Niger, fellow members of the Alliance of Sahel States, received the signal. Emergency alert. Red code. A joint military communique was drafted and broadcast live. If Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not released within 3 hours, the AES will consider this an act of aggression against its sovereignty. All consequences henceforth shall be the responsibility of ECOWAS and its collaborators. It was a checkmate, What was meant to be a quiet diplomatic detention had exploded into a global diplomatic crisis. Abuja was on fire, figuratively. Phones rang in European capitals. Washington issued a statement. The African Union scrambled to de-escalate. Nigerian intelligence agents, stunned by the swiftness of the response, received orders to de-escalate. Tinubu's office went silent. There was no official apology, just a misunderstanding, a procedural error. But it was too late. Traore had turned the trap into a global humiliation. He walked out of Abuja that same day, unchained, unbroken. His convoy drove past the ECOWAS banner, and as he boarded his jet, he paused at the top of the stairs, turned and looked out. Not with anger, but with something deeper. Pity. Pity for those who still served masters with white hands and blood-stained suits. The moment he landed back in Ouagadougou, the capital erupted in cheers. Thousands poured into the streets, not for a football match, not for a concert, but for a man who refused to kneel. Mothers wept, fathers danced. The people knew they weren't just welcoming their president. They were saluting the return of their shield. Traore, Traore, they chanted. Africa is not for sale. If you're still watching, ask yourself, what would you have done in his shoes? Would you walk into that room? Would you call your people? Would you risk war to defend your name? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters. From that moment on, Ibrahim Traoré's name could no longer be dismissed as just another soldier. He was now a symbol of African resistance, of sovereignty, of dignity. And the blowback was immediate. The French government issued statements questioning the role of certain actors undermining regional peace. ECOWAS leadership fell into internal chaos. Nigeria's own youth began questioning their president's priorities. African bloggers, vloggers, street poets, everyone was talking. Africa has found its lion. One Nigerian activist tweeted, and Abuja tried to cage him. But inside the quiet walls of his presidential office, Traore didn't celebrate. He was already thinking ahead. I don't want a crown, he told his close aide. I want a country that cannot be bought. He understood. The battle wasn't over. The betrayal didn't come only from abroad. It lurked in the hallways of his own government, in soft whispers and secret bribes, in the hearts of those who wear his colors but serve other flags. And so, in the weeks that followed, Traore took actions that made headlines once more. Several top officers were quietly removed. Foreign NGOs with questionable ties were expelled. All French-language military training manuals were replaced with ones written in local tongues. A national civic education program was launched to teach children the meaning of sovereignty. He knew what many forgot. Freedom isn't given. It is guarded. And the trap in Abuja had reminded him, and the world, that no African leader is safe when they dare to stand alone. But it had also revealed something else. He was not alone. He had the people. He had the wind behind him. And most importantly, he had the will to fight on. Like this video if you're still with us. Every click helps others hear this story. Share this if you believe Africa's time is not tomorrow. It's now. But shadows don't disappear just because the sun rises. In the months to come, Traore would face something far more dangerous than ECOWAS traps or foreign media hit jobs. He would face betrayal from within. The kind that doesn't wear a uniform. The kind that drinks tea with you in the morning and poisons your name by night. And one day, that betrayal would nearly cost him everything. The rain fell hard that night in Ouagadougou. Thick drops thudded against the tin roofs of the capital, soaking the earth like the sky itself was weeping. But inside the military command center, Ibrahim Traoré wasn't watching the storm. He was watching the betrayal unfold in real time. A top general, one of his earliest supporters, a man he once called Big Brother, had been caught red-handed, coordinating secretly with external diplomats, signing off on leaked strategic maps, making midnight calls to contacts in Abidjan and Paris. And worst of all, plotting a soft coup masked as national stabilization. Traore had seen betrayal before, but this one cut deeper. This wasn't just political treason. This was personal. He sat in silence, watching the intercepted video again. The general, leaning back in his chair, smiling as he said, "Traore doesn't understand power. He thinks it's about morals. Let him chase revolution. We'll handle the state." Those words confirmed everything Traore feared. There were enemies not just beyond Burkina Faso's borders, but buried in its core, rotting it from within. The next morning, without ceremony or noise, Traore made his move. The general was arrested at 4 a.m. No shots fired. No press release. Just silence. But that silence spoke loudly across West Africa. ES intelligence agencies increased surveillance. Dozens of mid-level officers were rotated overnight. And for the first time in Burkina Faso's history, the government issued a full disclosure report of foreign political funding operations in the country. And then came the most surprising act. Traore took to national television, not behind a podium, not in military regalia. Just him, in a plain brown shirt, sitting at a wooden desk, looking into the camera. His voice was calm, but his eyes held thunder. "I am not your ruler. I am your servant. I do not fear death, but I fear betrayal. Not for myself, but for the children who will inherit our silence. The trap they set in Abuja failed. The trap they set here at home failed. And they will try again, and again. But remember this, the revolution is not in me. It is in you." In that moment, it was no longer about a man. It was about a mission. The streets exploded in chants, once again. But this time, they weren't calling just for Traore. They were shouting something different. Is sovereignty or death. It was now clear. The alliance of Sahel states was no temporary defense pact. It was an awakening. The people of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, three nations once dismissed as fragile, were forging something unseen in modern African history. A united bloc not tethered to colonial guilt, not chasing Western validation, but rooted in survival, dignity, and defiance. And their leaders, Assimi Goïta in Mali, Abdourahmane Tidiane in Niger, and Traore in Burkina Faso, were now brothers in arms. But alliances are made of men, and men are not gods. Foreign media painted them as warlords. Some African elites called them reckless. And internally, rifts began to surface. Disputes over resource sharing. Power struggles beneath public smiles. Suspicions fueled by foreign agents whispering behind closed doors. At one AES security meeting in Niamey, a senior Nigerian official even accused Burkina Faso of pushing too fast, too far. Traore didn't flinch. He leaned forward and said, "Slavery was slow too. Should we wait for chains to feel comfortable?" Silence. Then nods. Then a plan. The AES would launch a new joint initiative, a regional command structure independent of ECOWAS. A shared fund, contributed equally with zero Western oversight. And most daringly, a Sahel People's Media Network to bypass foreign-controlled news pipelines and speak directly to the people. From village radios to encrypted social platforms, stories began spreading, not of war, but of resistance. Stories of farmers who turned away IMF-funded fertilizers for locally made solutions. Stories of youth brigades protecting schools from jihadists, unpaid but unbroken. Stories of women sewing uniforms for volunteer militias. This wasn't just geopolitics. It was soul politics. But with every step forward, the price rose. Sanctions tightened. International aid vanished. Food and fuel shortages grew. And whispers of assassination began to surface again. One day, Traoré's convoy was ambushed just outside Bobo Dioulasso. His car was bulletproof. He survived. But 3 young guards, barely 20 years old, died shielding him. He attended their funeral in silence. Then he did something rare. He cried. He knelt beside their mothers and said, "Your sons didn't die for me. They died for something that doesn't yet exist, but will." And that dream of a free, united Africa was no longer abstract. From Kinshasa to Khartoum, young Africans began to whisper the name Traoré, like a spark in dry grass. Not because he was perfect, not because he had all the answers, but because he dared. He dared to walk into the lion's den in Abuja. He dared to call out betrayal at home. He dared to lose friends, face death, and still rise each morning not with fear, but with purpose. If you're still watching this, remember, Africa's story isn't just about borders and flags. It's about who owns the land, who writes the books, who tells the stories, and more importantly, who's willing to fight for them. Tell us where you're watching from. This story is yours too. Subscribe and share if you believe our history must no longer be written by strangers. Ibrahim Traoré didn't just escape arrest. He didn't just survive betrayal. He ignited a fire, and that fire even now is spreading. So when they ask you someday, what happened in West Africa in 2024, 2025? Tell them this: a trap was set, but the lion did not step in. He turned. He roared, and the world watched in silence. If this message moves you, take a second to like and share. Because history isn't just written, it's witnessed, and you are the witness.